Morphe in the early to mid 2010s were on top of the cosmetics world. But following several controversies, the company has crumbled from the inside out. So what exactly went wrong, and why haven't they been able to recover? Morphe was founded in 2003 as a brush business and purchased in 2008 by Los Angeles-based duo Chris and Linda Towell. The two, at first, continued by selling the same goods that were available from the company already online and at trade shows while they tried to find a gap in the market. Linda and Chris took turns traveling to smaller shows to create awareness for their products upwards of 20 times a year across the US to sell the brushes and introduce people to their brand. By which, of course, they mean influencers, with whom they would gift free products to channels with as little as 6,000 to 7,000 subscribers, including a young James Charles. So, as they expanded their product offering to include cosmetics products with the platform of cruelty-free makeup, they found their competitive advantage on which they could market their brand. Morphe recognized the importance of social media influencers before most other brush companies and forged relationships with the people specifically behind those channels too. I said this same thing in my ColourPop video, but gifting products to influencers was already established at this point, as was influencer collabs, starting with the Mac bloggers obsession in 2011. But Morphe would go one step further by starting their affiliate program. This was a creative partnership to allow influencers to make a few coins on products sold with their codes or have their name on products like the Jaclyn Hill Favorites palette without the stress of having to run their own company. Because the influencers could make a decent earning from this, they heralded Morphe as the next big thing and really catapulted Morphe into the limelight. Over time, this became so successful that Morphe's strategy to drive sales was largely based on forging strong relationships with major influencers to benefit monetarily from the parasocial relationships that these influencers had with their audience that also were Morphe's target market. However, we know in hindsight that the beauty community was a very fickle place and by 2016 would be fraught with controversy. Morphe's first scandal also came in 2016 when makeup artist Stephanie Nicole reviewed Morphe Cosmetics and brought attention to the fact that Morphe is a private label cosmetics company, meaning that they use a third-party manufacturer to produce the product and then just print their name on the packaging. This is actually very common in the industry, and realistically it doesn't always affect the quality of the product or say that it's the same or even similar formulas to other companies that use the same manufacturer. But to the audience who potentially didn't know, they may have felt duped into spending more money on the branding and may have felt it was inauthentic. This was a major factor to consumers and so caused a big scandal that still follows Morphe to this day. And although widespread awareness of this did eventually die down and Stephanie Nicole was blocked from all Morphe social media channels, Morphe's reputation was heavily damaged from this. So, Morphe rebranded their logo and colorings in the hopes of refreshing brand interest and began teasing one of their biggest hit products. In 2017, the heavily anticipated second Morphe collaboration with Jaclyn Hill was released to monumental success, and in just 2017 alone, 1 million of the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palettes had been sold, which I believe was their first product to do so. This was a major milestone both for Hill and Morphe, and so obviously warranted a sequel. The sequel was actually named The Vault, and originally was scheduled to debut in June 2018, but was swiftly postponed in reaction to criticism from YouTube beauty influencers who called out the palette for its poor quality. But even with the supposedly new product that returned a questionably fast time later, many fans continued to complain about the palette's poor quality when Morphe did finally release it in August 2018, and so it was deemed a failure by the beauty community. However, as time went on, this, like the scandal before it, was less and less impactful to Hill's and Morphe's reputations. In fact, though Morphe had some very high highs in this time, like the James Charles palette, which on release was an absolute phenomenon, though it did have a small scandal for him potentially using fake swatches in his release announcement video, and they also had highs in the opening of stores all across America, Morphe was becoming very well known for being involved in controversy, largely in part to their involvement with Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson, with whom Morphe had had collaborations dating as far back as 2016 with Jeffree. We all know Dramageddon, when Tati Westbrook accused James Charles of a whole host of things, only for him to then debunk them and then Tati to make an apology video and blame it on Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star, who in the same video she also accused of being a co-owner of Morphe, which he is not. And yes, I know I'm simplifying this, but it was because of this drama that Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star's racist, pedophilic and bestialic words and actions came back into light, and it was because of this that Morphe was pulled into the picture from people online who were planning to boycott Morphe because of their continued support of Shane, Jeffree and James, shown by them not making a statement and then continuing to stock their products. Eventually, following Morphe being pulled into the conversation, they did announce their separation from Jeffree Star and his makeup line, Jeffree Star Cosmetics, in July. But after this, around the early 2019 mark, Morphe had a really damaged reputation. They did attempt to have a comeback with the launch of their foundation and concealer, but that also flopped, specifically because of their bad reputation. But honestly, other companies have bounced back from much worse than this. So either I guess it was simply that with the loss of trust in Morphe, that the market was now too saturated with better affordable makeup, so people really never had a need to return to Morphe for them to be able to get their reputation back. Or it was because of something that I touched on in my Gentle Monster video on my fashion channel. Gentle Monster is a great example of a company using experiential retail as pull marketing to make you want to go to their store. You have the desire to be there to experience their very unique retail spaces. Whereas Morphe, with their constant pushing of codes on YouTube, were involuntarily being turned into push marketing by the influencers who wanted their affiliate income. To explain this a bit more properly, push marketing is where a company is literally pushing you to buy the product. They're not making you yourself come to the realization that you want to buy so much as telling you that you should do it. There's even easy examples on YouTube. So for example, I have a Patreon, much like many YouTubers. And if I wanted to pull marketing you to the Patreon, I could leave the link below and allow you to find it yourself if you enjoyed my content and you personally wanted to find more. So effectively, you're coming to me. I'm not bringing the Patreon to you so much as making you aware of it and able to find it. Push marketing, though, can be successful in some cases as well, like when YouTubers tell you to subscribe every single video, they've brought you to the button and they're pushing you to click it, or like me telling you about a product or service as a paid ad, just like I did with my Patreon a second ago, or my Gentle Monster video as well. That's also push marketing. But in beauty YouTube at the time, it became annoying because of how common it was to hear about these codes. I know a couple of people in my Colourpop video commented about how sick they were of hearing codes from Colourpop, but for Morphe, it really felt like every single YouTuber had a code. Their codes became too saturated, and frankly, people were sick of hearing about Morphe, and they didn't have a good enough differentiator or competitive advantage for people to care that Morphe had dropped off. This all came to a head a bit later in 2019 when General Atlantic bought a majority stake in Morphe Holdings to go into business alongside their current investor Summit Partners to create what's now called Forma Brands. Forma Brands was to be a top growth equity firm, which in simplified terms just means it's an incubator or like a parent company to various different brands. This merger was significant and completely changed the way Morphe, which is now as a parent company called Forma Brands, would work as a company. No longer was their focus only on making their own makeup line, as they still do under the Morphe brand, but they would instead focus on the influencer-led market to bring their brands to consumers instead, in a similar way that Seed Beauty worked for Colourpop and Kylie Cosmetics, or on acquiring smaller companies with potential, as General Atlantic just did with Too Faced, making $750,000 profit when they sold it on. Under Forma Brands, several brands have either been purchased or brought to market, including Jaclyn Hill Cosmetics, Such Good Everything, Player, Lipstick Queen, and obviously Morphe, who will continue to do influencer collabs as they did before, like with Nikita Dragun, and their fairly recent collab with Maddie Ziegler. But not all of these collaborations have been successful, and the new merger couldn't keep controversy away from Morphe. In November 2020, Morphe announced the Lisa Frank Morphe line with a product tease on Instagram. However, after Lisa Frank held an online campaign for a collab with Glamour Dolls that failed to produce and deliver its products they had promised and subsequently then refused to issue refunds to its customers, the Lisa Frank company brought a boycott of their products to Morphe, leading then to dismal sales. So despite the nostalgic packaging, this was yet another loss for Morphe. So it really felt to the public that too many of their collaborations with influencers and even companies at this point were accompanied by controversies, and Morphe really wasn't able to shake this negative brand perception. However, despite all of this turmoil, Morphe's sales actually did grow more than 300% between 2017 and 2020. So at least potentially financially, they were doing okay. At least that was until February 2021, when it was alleged that James Charles had coerced several underage boys into sharing sexually explicit photos over Snapchat after grooming them. This controversy went on for a while, with several of the boys coming out with stories of their unconsented experiences with James Charles, all before April, when James Charles posted a video in which he did admit to his inappropriate conversations with minors and expressed regret to two distinct people, both under the age of 18. Following this confession, much like the Jeffree Star Shane Dawson controversy before it, Morphe was brought into it because the beauty community thought that Morphe wasn't doing enough. They were still selling the products from his previously very successful 2016 collaboration, and so their social media was flooded with criticism and comments demanding that Morphe take the palette off the shelves with the hashtag #BoycottMorphe. Morphe bowed to this pressure and did eventually sever their relationship with James Charles, with the announcement on Twitter that they would cease their commercial partnership and wind down sales of the Morphe James Charles product line. This was a pretty big hit for Morphe, as this really was one of their biggest cash cows for the company because it resonated with so many communities. So with that, their other brands being much smaller, and with Jaclyn Hill Cosmetics still struggling to come back to relevance after their own controversy with people finding hair and other substances in their lipsticks, it really looked like Forma Brands was in trouble. To save their company, Forma released R.E.M. with Ariana Grande that was financially successful at first, but not critically, which then led to bad sales later on. Bad Habits with Emma Chamberlain as creative director that even she failed to save. They announced a beauty line with Demi Lovato that never came to stores, a skincare line with Charli D'Amelio that also never came into stores, and a perfume line with Charli D'Amelio that actually did come out, but didn't do well. So they ended up really focusing on bringing Morphe back to life. Morphe introduced its first sub-brand called Morphe 2 in July of the same year, which was supposedly Morphe's response to the no-makeup cosmetic style that was becoming popular thanks to companies like Glossier and largely embraced by Gen Z. And they even hired Charli and Dixie D'Amelio to be the faces of Morphe 2 at launch. So marketing was fine, the concept for the product was fine, but there wasn't enough skin color range to be as inclusive as Gen Z buyers require. It seemed like they didn't really do enough research into their target market, as Gen Z really do require inclusivity as a baseline for a company, whereas instead they were focusing more on just product range, releasing 6 new items in the collection. Despite this dismal color range, this actually was kind of a step in the right direction for Morphe at the time, who were a bit late to the TikTok game, but seemingly it was too little too late, because Morphe in 2021 only made $295 million in revenue, which does sound like a lot, but it's almost half of what they made in 2019, which, in case you don't know, revenue is before costs and expenses, so if you do minus from that amount the cost of production, marketing, advertising, the D'Amelio sisters, wages of its 470 employees, it's significantly likely that they were working at a loss. By October 2022, Reorg Research claimed that Forma Brands may declare bankruptcy. They allege that the amount of debt owed by Forma Brands is between $600 and $700 million US, which I would guess is a conservative sum for such a big company that has been working at a loss for at least 2 years now. According to news reports, Forma Brands is actively discussing methods to improve their company's financial position by looking at the brands and the products that are still doing well, which seemingly they were not doing before, as since all of this transpired, Player, which is a hair care line acquired by Forma on their launch, which I mentioned before, has recently announced that they're now suing Forma for effectively stunting their growth to try to force more growth opportunities for their now failing Morphe brand, which they allege resulted in a loss of sales and exposure for Player, the company. Meanwhile, some attribute the drop in sales to the pandemic, supply problems, waning consumer interest in colourful cosmetics, and then because of all of the controversies that we've talked about in this and some of the other ones. This is not surprising given that the beauty industry does appear to be seeing a general decline across the board and that numerous companies have had to completely shut down in the previous 2 years. In regards to Morphe, I don't think they're 100% in the wrong for everything totally. I think that they have been dealt a difficult hand with being caught up in so many controversies that yes, they could have responded to faster, but they weren't really their own controversies in the first place. However, for the business side, hanging up brands to dry while you save a company that is tanking simply wasn't the best use of their time nor money and ultimately resulted in them losing millions of dollars due to ignorance. And quite frankly, betting on so many companies at once would have had their team spread thinly and their brands self-cannibalizing, especially considering they didn't really seem to be doing enough market research to understand what their new consumer of Gen Z actually wanted. So clearly, it was too much too quickly. Sadly, though, I do worry that more firms, maybe some less controversial ones, may come up with equally diminished sales after Christmas and into the New Year's impending recession. But remember that on the chance that it does happen, just because Morphe files for bankruptcy doesn't inherently mean it will disappear forever. They could actually use this opportunity to go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy to admonish former brands from debts before finding investors to then rebrand the company to one that, with fewer brands under their umbrella, could genuinely make a comeback with new consumers. Effectively, they could use Chapter 11 bankruptcy as a strategy for former brands to reorganize the brands under their umbrella to the ones that they genuinely see a potential future with. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell notification for more videos like this one, and check out the rise and fall of Colourpop here, or my fashion channel for more videos like this one but about fashion brands, and of course my Patreon if you want early access to videos.